All right, here we are. Good morning, John. Great to see you.
Good morning, Kate. Always good to talk with you.
And welcome to anybody who is watching. I am Kate Howe. I'm the co-founder of Postcards for Parents, and I'm with Dr. John Stewart.
And I'm a clinical psychologist and proud consultant and leading clinical support to Postcards.
Great. Well, today we're talking about a really interesting topic, which is parental power. And I have to admit, it's not something that I had sort of considered before. And it's a little bit, hard for me to, I know what those words mean, but I don't exactly know what they mean together. So can you just start by telling us what you mean by that? What does power mean in parenting?
Yeah. Let me give a little background to it. And this is, I've worked with parents with this. I've worked with teachers with this. I've worked with a lot of treatment programs in terms of their frontline staff in understanding this concept. But if we bring it back to parenting, which is really where its roots are, it's the fundamental idea is that our kids feel safest and are least kind of impacted by anxiety and stress when they are feeling like their caretakers are powerful and competent. Now, there are moments where that may seem counterintuitive, such as dealing with adolescents, but we can talk about that down the road. But so it's just the idea that, it's kind of like if you were, if you're flying in an airplane and you don't know how to fly the plane, you are going to feel best about a pilot who seems to know what he's doing, doesn't get frazzled, and so it's how do we hold on to our power? Because then, if that pilot says, "I want you guys to do this," well, you're more likely to do it. If the pilot seems, like he is not in a good place to be making clear decisions,
right?
He's looking at jumping out of the plane himself. It is not something that creates both a sense of calm and a readiness to entrust yourself to this caretaker. And so holding on to power is kind of an interesting notion because it sounds like it's, what is power? Power has nothing to do. As a matter of fact, one of the best ways to be experienced as powerless with a child is to resort to your physical power or the power of anger or the power of your capacity to be coercive. Those are things that express to a child a sense of desperation on the part of the parent.
Wow.
And there are few things that are as opposed with respect to power than a child experiencing their parents as desperate for compliance, desperate to agree to something, desperate to accept responsibility. When we're desperate, our power level drops way down. And there are two things about this, because one is the higher our power is, the less anxious our kids are.
Okay.
The other is that if we have kids, particularly teenagers, who are, they're looking to have their own sense of power in a way that is recognized and respected. Well, one of the things that we know is that when teenagers experience a caretaker, whether it's a parent or a teacher, it's kind of here. They're pretty powerful. They're wise and they're kind and those sort of things. We'll talk about that in a minute, but they're pretty powerful. If I have to subordinate myself to this person who I experience as powerful, well, that's not that bad.
Interesting.
I'm not as strong as Superman. Well, okay, all right. I'm still pretty strong, but I'm not as strong as Superman. If kids, particularly adolescents, experience a caretaker as being not very powerful, and now they have to subordinate themselves to that, it's an injury to their sense of self, to their self-esteem. So power, as we're talking about it, both makes kids feel less anxious, and particularly as you go into adolescence, it makes kids more likely and willing to subordinate themselves to you.
Well, so that's fascinating. So, a couple of things about that. I'm really curious to hear more. So why is, physical power or yelling, like those things are sort of like the I don't know, the most the most like strong.
Those are our go-to. Those are our go-tos when we're frustrated.
Yeah. So why does that not feel powerful to a kid?
Well, because it speaks of desperation. Most parents would not say that's them at their best. Most parents, when they go to that kind of place, do recognize that I've now moved into territory where I'm being, coercive, and I'm not, this isn't good for the relationship. Now, it doesn't mean that you never do that. I mean, there are moments where the situation kind of demands that you maybe use everything you got in that moment, and then you'll make a repair later and fix it. The idea that heightened kind of apprehension, kids will read at that level of irritation as desperation. They'll read it as fear. They'll read it. And one of the things that we know is that when we're in the presence of someone who's emotionally elevated, our mirror neurons, or whatever the hell we want to attribute it to, align with that.
Yeah.
Survival was dependent upon our ability to respond in a way that was reactive to folks who represented a threat. And so one of the things that we do is when we go there, our kids are more likely to either go into compliance, perhaps, but fight, flight, or freeze, because they're moving into a stance of protection against that. And we know that when the brain is activated in that way in a child, they don't learn. That it is not something that heightens cognitive efficiency in learning. It just doesn't. So I don't think there's any question that if, as a parent, you come away from a situation going, I used some tools there to get compliance that I wish I'm not centered on the camera here. I wish I wouldn't have done that, or God, that wasn't good, or because in the final analysis, with little ones as well as with teenagers, it is the relationship with the parents that is most predictive of good outcome. Now, that doesn't mean not having bad moments, because there'll be plenty of those.
Right.
It means avoiding them and making repairs when they happen.
Right. So let's go back to that analogy of the airplane and the pilot, because that makes total sense. But then in an airplane, you have the door locked, so the passengers aren't coming in to bother the pilot, and the passengers aren't saying.
Well, it depends, Kate. Not. Yeah, you're right. In a family airplane, they crash the cockpit, don't they?
Yes, and they grab the controls and they say, "I'm not going there." So talk about so then. There are challenges to this power, whether, I get what you're saying. So on a like very true level, kids feel better when their parents are in control, but that's not how they behave. And as you said, they're trying to assert their own control, and obviously they might have different ideas about what they want to do in any moment. So what are how should a parent think about that, and B, what are the better ways to keep their power?
Those are both, absolutely. That I think that one of the first things, and we'll talk about this more over time, is that your relationship between the pilot and the co-pilot, or between the two co-pilots, is an important variable. Because if there's a sense that parents aren't on the same page enough, now parents are there's going to be differances. They're going to realize they can work dad this way and mom this way. That's all normative stuff. But if there is an undermining of one another's power on the part of the parents, that's really problematic. So I would say at least half of the couples, or half of the families that come in to see me because they're struggling with a child's behavior, they end up in couples therapy, because we got to fix that first. Okay. Got to help them get to a place where they're not inadvertently, or even sometimes intentionally, cutting each other off at the knees. So that's that, but that's a big picture issue. So, the other thing is that the task is to not lose yourself in the moment. And there are moments when you don't have the time to do that, but it takes conscious parenting. It takes realizing, my internal barometer is going up. And as it goes up, my kid is likely to become more reactive in a fight,
Mhm.
flight, freeze mode, and it's
Mhm.
not going to go well. It's not going to support their feeling safe in my presence. So a lot of it is taking a couple deep breaths, quieting yourself. I think I mentioned before to you, a teacher that I worked with really difficult kids in a treatment program that I used to help run, that she was about 90 pounds and she was unbelievably powerful.
I want to know what this woman, what did she do? Walk me through it.
What she did was she was unflappable, but she was also very loving. She was so, as a matter of fact, the more wound up a kid got, the quieter she got. You could go into her classroom, and if it was getting a little wiki, she'd start talking very softly in a very sweet voice. And the kids would all see that her name was, this is very positive, I'll give you her name. Her name was Alice McLatchy. All the kids would quiet down what she was saying. But she was as tender as you could be with kids, but nobody messed with her. I didn't mess with her. I was her boss. And I'd go in and do observations, and I might sit on a table with she didn't want me sitting on. And she'd come back there and gently remind me that we don't sit on tables in my classroom. and that it was
what tone of voice? Like, I need more details here.
The voice that she would use would be kind of her standard voice, but it would be just softened. It'd be, it's getting kind of loud in here, guys. You know, or she'd lean down next to a youngster and say, you know, who's starting to struggle with the kid next to them. She'd say, it's kind of hard to be here right now, isn't it, buddy? You know? So
she was empathizing with the child.
See what align. You remember as we talked about, and we'll talk a lot about co-regulation. When you've got a kid that's starting to get jiggy, the first task at hand is for them to feel felt by you. That's what you got to connect with them, and then you can quiet down with them. That's co-regulate with them. Or if you want to direct them, you got to connect with them, and then you can direct them. One of the biggest mistakes that happens for us as parents, that we give away our power, is we don't connect with kids before we direct them.
Right.
And then they don't respond. And then we feel frustrated and disrespected. Yeah. And they feel misunderstood and angry and really well from that point forward. So that remembering that before you do anything, whether it's to help a kid calm or whether it's to direct a youngster, you got to connect. Yeah. And before you direct them, you've got to get them a little bit regular. You cannot direct a dysregulated kid. It's just, and the other thing that I would say about Allison is she used very few words. She would say, it's hard, huh? That was it. She wouldn't say it's hard because Joey next to you is shooting rubber bands at you and calling you names. She'd just say, it's hard. Because what we know is that lower right limbic system, it doesn't process language. It does process nonverbals, voice, posture. And so as few words as possible. Some of us who are verbose by nature, I would call it. Some of us, when we get anxious, we start talking. We start explaining why it's important for this to happen. And all that happens is as we start talking more, the kid reads that as anxious. They then process the language not well. Right. You kind of got a problem that plays out. So holding on to your power, so much of it is staying present. First, quieting yourself, taking 3 seconds, take a couple deep breaths and say, I want to be effective. And this right now is they're struggling with either hearing me or responding to the demands of the situation. So I've got to get myself to the place where I need to be. And when you're not able to, it's not the end of the world, but you come back later and you fix it. And you say, I'm sorry, sweetie. When I saw you, when you and your sister were struggling, I was already kind of frustrated about this and that. And I got kind of grouchy with you in a way that I wish I wouldn't have. That wasn't helpful. You know, so you make repairs. That's the parachute. But to the extent that you can, you absolutely want to come into situations as calm as possible. The other thing is being patient.
Okay.
Because you can give a kid a direction. And many kids, particularly when they know that, they're maybe in a little trouble or they don't process it well and they need some time.
Right.
You give them a direction and then you turn around and don't just stand there and watch them. I see teachers do that. Joe, you need to put your books up. And then they stand and watch the child. And the kid reads that in a couple of ways. One, she doesn't think she doesn't think that she has much power and that I'm going to listen to her. That was what Allison did beautifully. She would give a direction and then she'd kind of walk away. She'd connect, give a direction, walk away, conveying the message. I know you're going to do what I ask you to do. I don't about that. Being patient, giving a direction, turning your attention away from the child, and then giving them a chance to both process it and kind of do it on their own. So being patient is a really big piece of it.
Yeah.
Not moving into trying to intimidate the child. Consequences. Well, this is what's going to happen if you don't do it. As soon as you do that, man, there's that smell of desperation. Not threatening. Another one. Don't ever threaten to bring someone else in.
How so?
Most contemporary parents aren't going to do this, but even subtly, you don't want to say, well, wait till your father gets home. or it is okay to say, I'm not sure what to do with this. I'll talk with Dad. Dad and I will figure it out, sweetie. There's nothing wrong with kind of bringing in supports. They say, what are you going to do if I don't do it? I say, I don't know. Dad and I will talk about it. We'll figure it out. And it's not the end of the world. When a kid is they're at a place where they're beginning to unravel and it gets tough, that's a really important time for you to be able to convey, this is going to be okay. This is a bad moment, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So, just kind of slow down. Don't threaten. Find that quiet voice within you. Not always easy. One other thing I want to say is don't negotiate with a non-compliant child.
Okay.
That speaks of desperation. Now,
what kind of situation?
Give me an example. The little one says, I'm not going to go to bed because I want to finish this show. You say, well, how about 15 more minutes? Or you're much better off saying, if you can sit there while I count to 5, then we can talk about what our plan is. Because what you're doing, you're establishing the hierarchy that once they're compliant, you can move into some negotiation. You can begin to but not because if you negotiate with a child, you're saying they're your equal.
Okay.
They have the same amount of power, and you don't want that. So, I'll say to teachers, they'll have a teenager who will say, I'm going to the bathroom. And they get up and they're walking out of the bathroom kind of in a defiant way. And I'll say, what you say really fast is you say, Joe, if you'll sit down and raise your hand, I'll let you go to the bathroom. and then the kid sits down for a nanosecond, raises his hand, and she says, Joe, go head out to the bathroom, buddy. Because what they've done there is they've kept the child in compliance. They haven't gone in negotiation. They haven't freaked out. So there's lots of tricky ways that you can kind of learn how to hold on to your power by not putting a youngster in a position where they're essentially going to take you on.
Right. So so part of that, I can see where that comes crashing into what I think is just the main cultural belief we have, which is kind of you can't reward bad behavior. So, for example, you mentioned the with sibling fights, and this is kind of something that happens in my house a lot. One of my kids will be fighting, and that like makes my me go into kind of meltdown mode. And I have learned to do more what you're saying, which is approach the one who kind of picked the fight or the aggressor, and embrace her and kind of like not address what she did, but try to connect more. But that feels, based on all my conditioning, wrong. It feels like I have to say, stop this, you did something wrong, you're being, you picked on, or you hit, or whatever, all the thing. So it feels like ignoring the bad behavior. And again, I know it's not rewarding, but sort of like also ignoring kind of the one who is the victim and really focusing this love on the one who is being aggressive. I think for a lot of parents, it's just like that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. No, I think that the dilemma that we have is that we overvalue our logical kind of left brain. And we think that teaching is about cognitive process with kids. It's really more about an emotional process with kids. Teaching kids how to, the reason they're struggling with their sibling is because their sibling is some way challenged them. Either they're competitive, there's something's happened there they haven't known how to manage. And so they kind of lose their power and go physical, or they go humiliating, or whatever of them. And so I think the dilemma that we have as a culture, and I see this in schools, and it makes me kind of crazy, because they work and they love behavioral models that everything is tied to a reward and consequence. And we want to, most things are not. Most of the learning that kids need to do is learning how to quiet their souls, quiet their spirits, to not feel so vulnerable so they don't act this stuff out. And I think that in schools, because they understand learning, they like that model. It's not a particularly effective model when it comes to things that really aren't coming out of the part of the brain that's rational. They're coming out of the part of the brain that's emotional. And so we teach kids, I think you've heard me say before, even things like empathy. Empathy is caught. It's not taught. They experience it from others, and it resonates with that in themselves, and they begin to know it. So upset kids are fundamentally, Ross Greene was the one who talked about this, I think pretty eloquently. Kids are doing the best they know how. Kids want to do well. And when they can, they do. And when they're not, it isn't because they don't want to. It can feel like that, because when a child is taking your power away from you, when they're making you feel powerless, oh my God, it can feel like their power is here and ours is here. And that makes it crazy, because we know it's supposed to be the other way around. So I think that, but when we recognize that 95%, if not more, of problematic behavior is coming out of a place that the child doesn't know why they're doing it. Coming out of this kind of, right hemispheric emotional stuff. And so our task is to help them quiet emotionally. And then later you can go back and you can tell a story. Later you can go back and say, once they're calm, once they're in a good place, now their brains are working efficiently. I think that when that was happening earlier, I think you were frustrated with your sister because she did so well in her soccer game, and you just, that was hard to see us talking about that, and I get that, we've all feel that sometimes. That's not anything to be ashamed of. No, I'd rather you not hit her, and you'll figure that out. Always carry forward hope. But hey, you're in the process of learning, because otherwise it makes kids feel completely discouraged and shameful.
Right.
Hope is the antidote to a lot of shame.
What do you think the other child, in that example, the other sibling who's been attacked, what does that say to them if the attacker is then kind of embraced?
What's interesting about that is they just generally want the attacking to stop. And generally, if there's a pattern, they figured out how to make it work pretty well for them too. So I think that at a later point, you go back and you when they're in a good, a nice emotionally stable place, say, this is what I'm trying to do, sweetie. I'd be really transparent. Something was getting on your sister, and maybe it was because you did so well in the game and all that attention. And that's, I don't want her to take that out on you. We're so proud of you. So love watching you do that stuff. And so that's why I was trying to figure that out. So just know when that happens,
Mm-hmm.
Figure out how to not have that happen more to you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want it to happen to you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I may sometimes do it well and sometimes not do it well. So I encourage parents to be about as transparent as they can be.
Okay.
Why they're doing what they're doing. Because when kids can have a coherency, because we're talking a lot about emotional learning, but when they can then develop a story that says, "Oh, that's why that was that way." Well, then we've got both sides. We've got both sides working together. That's what we want.
Yeah, I'm just laughing because yesterday we were doing some play, and I was being a horse who was sad about something. My older daughter came and said, "Okay, time for therapy," to me, and that's not something that we talk about. So I think there's more transparency in the culture these days as well, and we do talk
absolutely. No, it's striking how much psychological awareness, psychological intervention, how much that is a part of the culture of educated upper middle class kids.
Right.
And above.
So you've kind of answered a lot of my questions about this, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I mean, I think it takes a lot of consciousness on a parent's part to like not go to those old ways that we are used to, kind of reasserting our power. I imagine that there will be some like awkward transition times when you're kind of not reaching for those old ways, but still, your kids aren't used to the new ways. Your kids are still maybe defiant in some way, and there's just like, I
would tell the kids, if I'm going to change how I do things, if I'm trying to change, I'll say, "Hey, you know what? I don't like how I get so angry sometimes when you're not doing what I'm asking you to do. And I'm realizing you probably are doing the best you know how. And so I'm really going to work on it. I'm going to try some different stuff. So don't be surprised." Because once again, now you've given the kids a way of making sense out of, because if it just starts changing, then it becomes unknown. It's kind of like, "Oh, what the hell? Who abducted my mom and put this lady here?" So when you give them a little narrative, say, "So this is what I'm going to try." And they're like, "Oh, okay." They see it. It's, so just be real transparent.
And I'm sure they'll be the first to give you feedback on.
You're not doing it, Mom.
Yeah. But it's also interesting when you mentioned teenagers who are trying to increase their own personal power, and even earlier, kids need a certain amount of power. So how do you recommend kind of giving the appropriate amount of power to a child while also kind of keeping the parent's power?
Boy, that is an ever-changing balance. It's knowing your child well enough. It's good luck. It's a lot of variables that help you do that. One of the things I talk to parents about sometimes is that we have an obligation to be both loving and respectful of our kids. And teenagers will sometimes reach a point where they've banked enough love, and now they're demanding respect.
Okay.
So they'll say, they'll lock themselves in their room all day, and then, parent knocks and comes in and they go, "What do you want? Get out of here." And they want us to respect that. They want us to respect that. But sometimes if respecting what they're asking for negates your ability completely on some level to be loving with them, then you got to figure that out. You got to challenge it. You can't let them. Kids know what they want, and we need to pay attention to what they want, but they don't know what they need.
Right.
You heard me say before, but one of the things that they all need is sometimes to get what they want.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing about this is clear. So you're always walking the line, and you may have to go back and make a repair and say, "I'm sorry. I didn't, I wish I would have managed that differently." That's fine. But it is hard to know, particularly with teenagers, how much leeway to give them. I think I've told you before the story of in our family, we always had a rule that we lived in this kind of big farmhouse, and so the kids, as they got older, they'd each they'd be in their room or whatever, and we'd say, before you go to bed, we want you to come and say goodnight to us, which was a big deal. They'd always come and find us, and we'd give them a hug, and we'd maybe walk them down to their bedroom, tuck them in or whatever, depending on how old they were. But, our son got to a point where he was not liking that. He was not, but he was respectful enough that he'd come in and he'd go, I'm going to bed, and head out. But he wouldn't let us hug him. So no, wait a minute. And so we got to a point where we'd hold out a finger and he would come and touch it and say, I'm going to bed. And that was good. That was all it's all he could do.
Yeah.
But it was still a loving act that respected him and also gave us a way to say, we're not just going to give up.
Right.
And passing on some love to you, buddy. Just because you don't want it from us, right?
That's really funny, and I'm sure that's kind of where humor comes in, and
absolutely.
I'm curious. I mean, I think humor in the context of power is an interesting thing to talk about as well, because in a way, if you proactively kind of make a situation humorous, which can sometimes be like making yourself less powerful, but in a humorous way.
You're actually more powerful.
Yeah, and you've chosen it, so you're kind of setting it up. But I was thinking about the example that you gave about you say it's time for bed, and your kid says, no, I'm not going to turn off the TV. It's two different things I want to talk about. One is like, so I could see that being the same as your example with the teacher, where it's like, the kid going, so you could say, maybe it's okay with you if they watch 15 more minutes, but you just can't kind of let it happen in that way. So it's like, if you can ask me in a respectful way, then I'll give you 15 more minutes or something like that. Or, so there's, yeah. And then how does, I think that
I would even say not so much respectful. I'd say, ask me in a nice way. Ask me in a way that makes me want to say yes.
Right.
Because you're teaching a social skill then.
Right. Yeah, that's better. And then my other question was around like parents who have trouble setting limits, or who sort of also feel like, oh, well, what's 15 more minutes? Or like, of course you can go to the bathroom. We've talked about power with parents who tend to like go to the kind of forceful power, but what about the ones who just like, don't kind of care about it that much?
Yeah. Kids with that nature of parenting tend to be a little more anxious. And as a parent, if you know that is kind of your style, that you tend to not sweat the small stuff, and there's nothing, that's not a bad thing. But balance is always about, balance is not static. You go a little too far this way and then you come back that way. So if you're a parent that knows you tend to be a little lax, well, then the task is for you to figure out how to tighten it up a little bit. And I think that can be done in lots of different ways. One of them can be, once again, if you're changing the rules, say, sweetie, I think sometimes, there's a lot of places you're going to have to listen to grownups, and sometimes we don't want to. And you got to kind of learn how to do that here. And I'm sometimes not great at doing it. So I'm going to try to be just a little more clear about the stuff that I expect you to do. And they'll say, okay, and won't really listen to you. And then it'll come up and it'll piss them off, because that change is always going to be hard.
Right.
If you've been a pretty permissive parent and now you're going to try to rein it back a little bit, that isn't going to happen overnight. That's going to happen. And the use of playfulness, the use of creating stories about why this is going on, the use of patience, all the things we're talking about are going to be really important as you try to kind of bring back a little of the power to you that's really going to be best for your kid, for you to have.
Mm-hmm. How can parents even kind of think about doing that if because there's a lot that goes into not sweating the small stuff or being more permissive. Some of it is I think values-based, like wanting your child to make their own decisions and like have independence, that those things are, a positive aspect to it. But also a lot of times it's like not wanting to cause conflict, not wanting to kind of, stifle them? I mean, so how do
you don't want every interaction to be a battle. You don't. So you still kind of pick your fights. You still pick which ones, and never, oh, this is a great way to lose your power. I should have mentioned this before. Never tell your kid that they're going to do something that you can't make them do. Because now you've just proved yourself foolish. You're going to eat those beans. You're not going to talk to me that way. Well, watch this. So I think one of the things is that just being as gentle but clear, and if the kid says, "No, I'm not going to bed," then you sit down next to him and say, "Sweetie, I'm going to sit here with you until you decide to do what mom's asked, because it's important for you to be able to do what I ask you to do." And sit there quietly, not threatening, not just saying, and they'll say, "What are you doing?" "I'm waiting for you to do what I asked you."
I'm going to freak you out until you do it.
I'm going to freak you out until there is some of that too. Any way that you can have power and it works, I'm good with that, as long as it's not coercive or abusive. But saying things like, youngsters will sometimes say, "What are you going to do if I don't?" Being able to say, "I'm not sure. I want to think about that. Dad and I will talk about it, and then I'll get back to you, sweetie." You just and you'll almost always get a kid to comply in that moment, because you've held on to your power. You haven't let them back you into saying, "Well, you're going to be grounded for the next 6 months, or you'll never see your friend again," or whatever. Yeah. So just learning to be patient, and realize that you can't win every battle right away. It takes a little time. And it takes showing that you're not going to get undone. And sometimes you're going to. So please don't hear me saying, "Oh, it's a terrible parent," because sometimes you are. It's going to happen. And then your parachute is you get to go back and tell a story about what happened. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the thing that I've learned to do is also just repeat, just like calmly, just keep saying what needs to happen. And eventually it usually happens, which is, the first time that actually worked, I was sort of surprised.
Well, I think that can happen. You do get kids who develop what's called, parent deafness, and they calibrate how many times they're going to be told to do something before mom or dad really mean it. So they can get to 5 times, and I get to 4 times. I know I better start listening. It isn't a bad idea. Not coming up with consequences, but it isn't a bad idea of saying, "All right, maybe even saying, I'm going to give you 2 warnings, guys, and that's it." And then they'll say, "Then what?" I don't know, but I don't want to just keep. If I give you 5 warnings, then by the time I give you the 5th one, I'm kind of frustrated, and that's not good for us. So I'm not saying that your strategy isn't good, Kate, because it may work great with your kids. And there are lots of, every kid, every parent, every family is a little different. You got to find the balance that works for your family.
Yeah. I think particularly when I do it, it's not just sort of like hurling a warning. It's kind of a process of connecting as well.
It's good. Yeah. I believe that. I absolutely. I mean, one of the things, and I'll say this because you're the proxy for other parents out there, is I see how hard you work at being a good mom. I mean, you're so committed, and your kids know that. You're making all kinds of deposits in their emotional bank, and every once in a while you're going to make a withdrawal, and it's just you just have bad moments. But that's actually, we've talked before about the concept of the good enough parent. That's you're going to make mistakes, and your kids learn to be resilient in the face of those mistakes, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're not going to encounter a world that is like perfectly kind of attuned to them, or always expressing itself in a kind and calm way. So they have to learn how to deal with that as well.
Yeah.
Well, this has been super interesting. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm really going to think about this in a different way. I think particularly for me, the things I'm taking away are just the slowing down, calming down, and the connecting before, that's really like kind of what enables any kind of compliance to happen. And that's really kind of what the issue is to begin with, probably.
You don't start talking on the cell phone until you hear the other person pick up. You know?
Yeah, that's a good metaphor. That's a great metaphor.
And kids are oftentimes slow to pick up because they're lost in their own stuff. Their executive function skills, that medial prefrontal cortex portion of split attention, is not as well developed for them, where they can be 99% into something. And that's only 1% to be monitoring what's going on, where adults tend to have 80% and 20%. So they, it's not hard. As a matter of fact, kids are almost startled by when they're in their own world, and then we come along, it's startling. And we can get a startle response, which can be a pretty grumpy, kind of irritable response. If we interpret that as a startle response versus a response of annoyance at us, it can also help us stay calm. Right.
And connect with their experience of being startled and validate that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I will let you know how all these new techniques go.
You're great. You're going to find some are going to work great, and some aren't going to be you, and some of them aren't going to be quite what your kid needs. But you'll figure it out, because that's what it is. It's a giant experiment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, John.
Right. It's always good to talk to you. Okay.
Likewise. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.